But I think we're ready to begin now. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating. We really appreciate your presence, and we love having these guests.
Thank you. Is the mic working? Yep. You can hear me? I just want to say thank you for setting this all up. There is a table of free books, but mine are not, okay? So I didn't want to get you mixed up there. How much are they, Robin? They're $20. You know, this whole idea came out of several things. 4 years ago, you know, we lost a couple years in there. 4 years ago, I interviewed Charles for an event at the Saratoga Library that was sponsored by the Saratoga Historical Foundation. And the library has a big room, and it got in, Annette Stransky, who heads the foundation, has a good contact at the Mercury, and Sal Pizarro put it in his column, and it got big. And that was on a Sunday afternoon, I think, Charles. And it got really crowded, and there were people driving around the Saratoga Library endlessly trying to find a place to park, you know, kind of like planes over O'Hare. And Charles came up to me before the event, and he said, "Robin, how is it possible we can do a sellout? I heard this talk is free." But that's Charles. And in fact, the library had to close the doors and keep people out because of the fire marshal. So then Leslie Dean asked me to speak to your group, and that was during the first year of the pandemic, and it ended up being on Zoom, and we had a really big turnout. And afterwards, she and I talked, and I said, I would love, now Andy came to the Charlie talk, and I just interviewed Charlie. And Andy was in the audience, and I said, I'd love to get Andy and Charlie together. And that was in 2020, December, and we planned it, and it's been put off several times because I didn't really want to do it on Zoom because I thought it would be much more fun in person. Don't you think so? Let's get a hand for the organizers. Okay. Now, we've had questions submitted, and a lot of them are really good. And I just wanted to start out asking both of them the same question, which is that you're both from well-known orchard families in the Valley. You both had opportunities to do other things. Charles went to the University of Denver. You went to University of Denver, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and he played football there. And then he went on and played professional football in Canada. And Andy has a master's degree and worked for a while as the assistant city manager of Saratoga. So they both had other possibilities in their life, but they both ended up as growers. So let me start with Charles. Did you think this is what you would spend your life doing, or did you consider other options? And can you answer that question for us tonight?
I really didn't consider any other options. I was just having a good time. And the farm, and my father and my mother worked so hard, and my grandfather before them, the grandmother, and I was just groomed for the job since I was like 8 years old. So when I finished college, it was interesting. That week I came home, we got there about, I don't know, around noon, and I was working full-time by 1 o'clock. And it just kept on going, and I did have a chance to play professional football, but there wasn't much money in it, and just to give you an idea what it was in those days, 1955, a going salary in the NFL for a lineman was $4,000 a year. And so I signed up with Canada and Edmonton Eskimos for $6,000 a year. And that still didn't get you very far. But anyway, I had a wonderful year there. They only can keep 11 Americans on a team, And I got injured, and so they let me go. And I had my place in the sun for a couple of days, and went back to work. When I got back, drove back to Sunnyvale, I was back to work the next day. So that's where I stayed. So I guess I was groomed to do it, and I never regretted it. It's been a beautiful romance.
How about you, Andy? I know you had some other things that you thought of doing.
Yeah, I don't know, is this working? Yeah, good. Yeah, we come from an immigrant family. I was the youngest of 3 boys. And, there's kind of a law primogeniture where, the oldest one, he gets the wealth. And then the second one actually is supposed to become a priest. And my heart wouldn't have been into that. And then the other one would have been in the military, the third one, and I was the third one. I'm pretty much a pacifist, so I decided to, and there wasn't enough land there. They were very frank with me. They said, there's not enough land. Both brothers, the other brothers, wanted to stay there on the farm and continue farming. So I was the odd man out, so I decided I better get an education. And I thought rather than be a priest or a soldier, city management sounded pretty good. So I did get an education. I got a master's degree in public administration. I landed in the city of Saratoga. And then things kind of fell apart there. I contracted a really serious autoimmune disease. So I came back to the farm after a year and just began recuperating. And it took like 17 years. But the more I stayed there, the more I liked it, the more I thought this is where I should be. It actually helped me therapeutically to get better. And so I ended up there.
Well, those are really interesting answers. Someone else submitted this question. If you could return to the beginning of your careers as fruit growers with the knowledge you have now, what would you do differently? Charles, you're smiling.
Well, it's easy to look back and say, the best thing to do is just go buy land and sit around and wait for it to get more valuable. And that's it. I mean, that's no joke. Then just sit around and wait for it to get valuable and take a job, maybe working someplace else to keep your food on the table. And then that's what some of the folks did. And a lot of farmers, I know that they sold out when their land got to around $10,000 an acre back in the 50s and the 60s. The orchards started coming down. And the truth of the matter is that the farming is a lot of hard work and no money, but it's a job. And the harder you work, the more money you make. And you have to have luck on your side. The weather has to be in your favor. And there's so many things you need to do in farming to make it work. And luckily for me, I had good guidance, and I was comfortable with what I was doing. And so we did do a little better in the land, but we could have been, anyway, we could have been.
We could have been. I said that when he and I were talking yesterday about this event tonight, and I said, well, before you answer, Charlie, I'll give you my answer. Buy more land. $100 an acre, you could get a lot of land. And his answer to me was, first you had to have the $100. And the value of the dollar has changed as well. So these are all learnings. Andy, how would you answer this question?
I agree 100% with Charlie. No, you have to realize that farmers were businessmen, and they had investments in the land. So that was important to them. When my dad came over in 1931, it was the height of the Depression, and he barely made enough money to send to his wife and family that were still in Europe. But afterwards, he went fishing, and during the Depression, you shared in the proceeds of the catch rather than a pittance by the hour. So he was able to, in 5 years, he'd be able to buy land. And we came from a family of actually peasants. It was a feudal system in Europe, and the land was either owned by the church or some wealthy nobleman. And so when my dad came here, he thought, God, this is a great idea. You can actually own the land that you work. And so that was important. You know, you're still a businessman, and you really, farmers are usually cash poor and land rich, and you need that $100, like he said, to buy the land. In answer to your direct question about what would I do to change things, it wasn't right in the beginning, but my brother and I, we would be growing basically commodities, apricots and prunes, and a little bit of cherries. And what we did was we had to do a paradigm shift because we had 45 acres of apricots. And the apricot market, the dried apricot market went down because Turkey was bringing in imports really cheap, and we couldn't sell dried apricots anymore. So we shifted to cherries. And so now we have 45 acres of cherries, and cherries aren't productive. So had I known that before, and I was able to make that change, I would have tried to have more diversified orchards and not plant so many cherries.
You have told me before that the valley in your parents' day was a Jeffersonian ideal, that it was kind of an egalitarian paradise. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, your feelings about that?
Yeah, you know, the opportunities were here. A lot of immigrants came from the East Coast, from Europe, and within a few years they were able to buy land. And it was always small little orchards usually. It wasn't more than about 50 acres most of the time. But it was kind of a place where everybody owned their own land. You know, they were called freeholders. Now, one time I said that, and somebody misheard me, and I said the valley was full of freeloaders, but I clarified that.
Yeah.
But the freeholder is a person that owns their own land. It's different than the plantation system or a sharecropping. Here, it's probably epitomized the whole ideal, the Jeffersonian ideal of Yeoman farmers. You know, they own their own land. They're small farmers, independent, and that made some other issues when we came to development because a lot of people just sold out, and there was nobody to control that. But that was what Wallace Stegner called the brief Eden. It was just everybody had their own land. They were making some money, and it was a beautiful place to live and grow up and produce fruit.
One of the questions someone asked is, what are your happiest memories from your childhood here in this valley? Do either of you want to address that?
Well, growing up, I was a good kid. I listened to my mom and dad, and but on the things they taught me along the road, one of the things my father said is, if you take care of the land, it will take care of you. And that proved to be true. And so a lot of faith in what they told me. And so that, I think, was one of the reasons that I stuck with it, because it made a lot of sense.
Tell us how your mother set up the first fruit stand on El Camino Real.
It was 1933. It's a lovely story how she got here and married my dad. And she was an entrepreneur. She was about 5 feet tall. She come from Lebanon, could not speak the language, and she ended up across the street from my father's ranch because her sister lived there. She had come earlier, and so she went to work for my father picking cherries and selling cherries, and they put 2 sawhorses in a tray, and they sold the cherries for 5 and 10 cents a pound. And they made some money. And so the next year, my father built her a shed about 20 feet wide and about 10 feet deep, but no doors, just a shed to keep her out of the sun and the rain, you know.
Was this before they were married or after?
No, after they got
You didn't
married.
mention how she nabbed him. How she got married to this big Swedish man.
Well, she was a very wise lady. She left Lebanon because there was no work at the time, 1920, somewhere in that area. and came to Mexico because her brother had left the Lebanon because there was no work for him, and there was no land. Lebanon is only the size of Santa Clara Valley. So one brother went to Venezuela, one went to Greece, I believe, and the third one went to Mexico, and she followed her brother Joseph to Mexico, and she raised his children for 5 years. And that was good because she got to learn how to cook Mexican food and all that business. And then she got malaria, and she survived it, but the doctor said she will not survive another go-around because there was no medicine to stop it, and they didn't really know what caused it. So she paid a fella $100 to drive her from Monterrey, Mexico, to Houston, Texas, and then they made a left turn and ended up in Sunnyvale.
So you got her in the valley. Now
Yeah.
she went to work for your dad.
And she went with my dad, and she came home and told her sister, my aunt, that she's going to marry that man because he has nobody to wash his clothes or cook for him. And that's a true story. They ended up living in Mountain View, and the rent was $10 a month for the apartment that they lived in. And a lot of nice things happened, and my dad went to went to grammar school into Mountain View, and he was going to go to Mountain View High School and decided he was going to be a farmer. So he quit school his sophomore year in high school and went to work to be a farmer. And interesting, he farmed some orchards right across from where St. Francis High School is. And the fellow that owned it, I believe his name was Ruderman, and he offered it to my father. There was 100 acres for $35,000. And of course, my father didn't have $35,000, and he was working as hard as he could, and it's a lot of work. And then the next year, Mr. Ruderman said to him that somebody offered him $55,000 for the 100 acres, but he would sell it to my father for $35,000. My dad said no. He had an eye on a piece of property in Sunnyvale that was going to be sold. It was 55 acres of cherries, and he was going to buy all he could. So he was able to, the company that owned it went bankrupt, and on the courthouse steps in San Jose, he was able to buy 15 acres out of the 55 acres.
Wow.
And that was probably the best thing he ever did. And then my mother, in the meantime, they got married. She got her wish. He didn't have a chance, really.
And that's how you came to be, right? We don't want to go too much further there.
So anyway, there was a man, I can't remember his name now, but they had 25 acres on El Camino between Matilda and Sunnyvale Saratoga Road. And my mother made friends with all the children of that family. And when the father passed away, my mother had saved up enough money to buy 10 acres from him, and for the family. And then she had also commitment from 2 more children in the family to buy their property when she got the money. So I wish I remember all the people's names, but I can't. And so she ended up buying 20 of the 25 acres.
That's really an amazing story.
Then she built her own fruit stand, and eventually she built her own home. And of course, my father was involved in this, but just to give you an idea how she thought, she was beautiful. When my father passed away, unfortunately, in 1980, she asked me how much money he left. And I told her, and she said, I have more money than him.
Charlie, these are great stories. I have to include Andy. Have you finished this story?
Well, one thing she told me just before she passed away, she said she wished she had not put her money in the savings and loan because it only paid 4% interest, and then she had to pay income tax. But if you buy the land, you don't have to do that. And so she said that's why she wished that we would buy more land, but that time it started to spiral upward and whatever. So we were lucky with what we had. So we pulled in our horns and then took care of what we had.
It sounds like you were lucky in your parents as well. Andy, I wanted to ask you, someone asked, what is the most memorable fruit you have grown and the finest tasting?
I can't answer that question. Just kidding. I was so fascinated by his stories. Okay, go ahead. Tell me what the
What
question
is the most memorable fruit you have grown and the finest tasting? And the reason I'm asking you is I know once you got your orchards going and you started selling specialty fruit, you've traveled a lot of regions in the world looking for interesting varieties of fruit, of stone fruits, apricots especially.
Okay. Yeah, it's hard to say what my favorite fruit is because there's so many of them that we grow now. I did. Let me backtrack to when I was growing up in Cupertino, because it's kind of story kind of evolves into that. When I was a little kid, my favorite tree was a Moore Park apricot tree. See, we were growing apricots and prunes. Now, even though an apricot is pretty exotic east of the Rockies, it's pretty commonplace in Cupertino. But a peach was something special. And so my dad had grafted on a Moore Park apricot, which is really a good apricot, and he grafted a Crawford peach and a clingstone. And that was my favorite tree. So the Crawford, I tasted it when I was a little kid, probably when I was 5 or 6 years old. and I think I spent the rest of my life trying to recapture that tasting experience of a really great peach. And so when I had the opportunity to plant peaches in Morgan Hill, we did that, and that's 35, 40 years ago. And my quest was to find really good peaches that tasted like that experience that I had when I was little. And I think I found some, and so one of my favorite ones is a baby Crawford peach, and that's one we actually rescued from the scrap heap in UC Davis. They were testing, evaluating new varieties, and this tasted like the old Crawford peach. And we grow it. It's one of my favorites, but there's others too.
Can people find that peach to plant in their gardens today?
Yeah, it's actually available in mail order catalogs and things like that. The only thing I can caution you on is that it does require a higher winter chill than we normally get in the valley here, and you usually get lighter crops. But I think it's worth it to have. As far as apricots, that's a whole new world there, a whole different world. The Blenheim, it's hard to beat a Blenheim. It's a standard here. It used to be grown actually all over the state in LA County, Orange County, Ventura County. It was the standard dried apricot, and it's still good. The Moore Parks and the Hemskirks are also grown here in the valley. Fantastic fruit. I've found other things that are really good as well. As you said, I had the opportunity to go to the Soviet Union way back in 1991, and we went to Tashkent, which is in Central Asia, and it's kind of where there's a lot of apricots grown. The genetic diversity is there because that's where one of the places where apricots originated. So you have white apricots, red apricots, all kinds of weird stuff, but also really high quality. There's some apricots that really aren't available for planting, but I have them. They're kind of proprietary varieties, but there's one intrepid explorer and breeder in California. His name is John Driver, good friend of mine. He went to all those stand countries, Turkmenistan and Tajikistan and all that. Yeah, and he collected a lot of these different varieties and brought them home and evaluated them here in California. Then he did some breeding on his own, and he's got a lot of varieties that are named after German women. Not German, I'm saying Russian women. He's got Yelena, he's got Anya, and he's got what's the other one? Yulia. And Yulia's my favorite.
Were these part of his travels, you think?
Well, I don't know. That's a good question. I never asked him. And he's quite a religious guy, so I kind of doubt. I think he was just making sure that that he was thanking the Russian people for getting this germ
Okay.
plasm. But anyway, Yulia is one of my favorites. It's got a rich flavor. It's like a Moore Park, times 5, in terms of its flavor. So those things, we grow them. I mean, they're available to taste and buy at my place. But those would be my favorite ones, quite honestly, But the other ones are all good too. Apricots are, I have like apricot nectar coursing through my veins. That's my favorite fruit.
Well, and one of the things I didn't realize growing up in the valley was that apricots were rare everywhere else that I lived. Apricots were
Exactly.
common here and rare in the rest of the country, and I've discovered in the world. Charles, what is your favorite fruit of the fruits that you've grown and nurtured?
Well, that's a good question. They're all good, like Andy says. It's a matter of taste. But my favorite is the Bing cherry. 2 reasons. One is that the people love them. My mother started a fruit stand selling those cherries, and I don't know anyone who could have done any fruit that she could have done better with. It's evolved. When we were growing up, there was four cherries, basically: Royal Anne, Tartarian, Bing, and Republican is the name of it. And the Republican and the Tartarian were pollinators. You know the story about pollinating the trees. You have to have the chilling hours, and that where they breed them together, whatever, and it works. Nature does all that. And so the cherry, the cherry that I like the best is, I think, the fruit I like the best is the Bing cherry. But the apricot, a fresh picked Blenheim apricot, they call it a royal some places, and it is a royal, and it's delicious.
One time when you and I were talking, you said you thought Los Altos grew some of the best apricots and that you could tell them by sight. Tell us about that.
Well, my dad was big on renting property from the farmers who didn't want to go through the picking process because it's a lot of work and a headache. So he had all the opportunities in the valley he wanted because people wanted to lease it to him or to rent it to him. So he had 2 orchards here in Los Altos, one on Mount Hamilton Avenue and one by the fire station. I can't remember that street, Almond, or one of those streets like that over there. And we hauled them in a Model A truck back and forth to their dry yard. And we had an orchard in Santa Clara rented. We had an orchard in Cupertino rented. And then we had our own 2 orchards. So we had a lot of work and a lot of apricots. So we had 5 acres to lay them out in the sun to dry and cure. And you could see the Los Altos apricots drying as the deepest orange and the thickest meat of all those cities. And it's because of the land.
The soil.
Up here, the soil that you have up here. And I think that the thousands of years of the water, they're bringing down the topsoil from up in the mountains.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know how deep it is, but it probably is. But so the Los Altos apricot was people who knew wanted those apricots, and they didn't want the Santa Clara or the Sunnyvale or the Cupertino ones.
There you go.
So like today, they don't, Los Altos is the high-tone town. They want to be here.
Andy, someone asks, what contributes to the quality, the high quality of your fruit?
My fruits or
Well,
fruits in general?
of fruit in general. You and I talked about the word terroir, which is the French word that was used for grapes and is now used for fruits. Can you talk about that? What makes a quality
I
fruit?
think I could say a few things. This is a coastal valley. And compared to the Central Valley, like a Blenheim apricot growing in the Central Valley, it's nothing. It has no character whatsoever. It's usually small. It ripens from the inside out. It's susceptible to sunburn, pit burn, all kinds of problems. Here, they grow to near perfection. And the reason why is we have cool nights, warm days. You can talk about the soil and terroir. I think it's the climate probably more than anything else. The cooler nights, and we do have some really cool nights in Morgan Hill, but usually warmer days than Los Altos. Good for peaches and pretty good for apricots too. So its climate is really important. I think Los Altos is the same way. Los Altos is, they've got that rich soil, but it's also kind of close to the bay, the measure of profitability in dried apricots is that drying ratio, they call it. So if you have 5 pounds of fresh apricots, makes 1 pound of dried, that's pretty good. But Los Altos apricots were like 4 pounds make 1 pound. And that makes all the difference in the world, whether you're gonna make money or not. So that's why everybody was looking for those thick dried apricots, because there's more yield. Anyway, getting back to the nights. The nights here, typically in the Santa Clara Valley will go down into the 60s, 70s maybe, whereas in the Central Valley, in July, you've got 110 in the day, you got 90 at night. And the trees actually, the fruit actually ripens too quickly. Doesn't have a chance to even pick up sugar. Here, the Blenheim apricot stays on the tree longer, collects more flavor, collects more sugar, and it's just a completely different kind of a fruit. So, and that would be my answer.
Someone wrote and asked, what was your best day in farming and growing? What was your worst day? And I'll give you an example. Your sister, Yvonne, wrote the book, Passing Farms, Enduring Values, which you can find in the library. It's a lovely book, and she wrote it in the 80s, I believe. One of the stories she told in there was about a year during the Depression, when your father got a letter from the cooperative that he belonged to and a check for $15 for his entire crop that year. That's what they negotiated. And he kept the letter on a bulletin board, the rest of his life, because it was for 8 tons of fruit. So that might qualify as a kind of a bad day in farming. Do you have a good day you like to remember, a bad day?
Elaborate on what you just said was that, oh shucks, when it came and went. Anyway, the best day, or the best time, was one year the temperature was cold, and everybody was wearing jackets and all this and that. And some of the fellows didn't have jackets, they had overcoats. And they were picking cherries with overcoats on ladders, and it was that cold. But that year, with that cold weather, all the way through the picking, it allowed the fruit to get the juices it needed from the tree and make the fruit more sweeter and have more longevity. So we had a very good year that year. And we topped the market as far as how much money we made. I'm talking not a lot of money, but and when you're farming, you understand. Anyway. And anyway, that was a beautiful year, but we only had one of those years. But sometimes the rains come, and my dad told me that 1923, they put all the ladders out of the barn and had them all lined up to go to work, and it rained 3 straight days and nights, and the worst time, and my grandfather ordered them all put back in the barn, so they never picked a cherry, but that's how it is. It's a crap, sometimes a crapshoot.
Farming is up and down, growing is up and down. Andy, what about you? Do you have an especially good or bad day you like to remember? Let's say a good.
I got some that can compare to Charlie's as far as bad days. They say that farming is a profession of hope. And in cherries, it could be I would like to characterize the profession of despair sometimes. Because just last year, and this is the reason why, I'm growing 45 acres of cherries, and that's way too much. It's a commodity. Whereas most of my other fruits are specialty. I can name my price there. The commodity goes to a packer in the Stockton area, and it just gets thrown on the market. Last year was a terrible market. The prices dropped to nothing. I had fruit that I sold at the farmer's market for $12 a pound, the same fruit, the same kind of fruit I shipped to the packer. I got bills for packing and nothing else. That's just last year. And this is why, to me, cherries are the heartbreak fruit. I mean, they find ways to really disappoint you, whether it's rain or the market. I mean, everything. So, yeah, the picking situation, yeah. So this is why I said earlier, I said that I have too many cherries. If I could do it all over again, I would plant more diversified crops.
But isn't that one of the challenges of being a grower, is that you put things in the ground and then it takes a while for them to reach maturity, and then the commodity value could change, but you still have the orchards planted in that commodity.
That's true. It takes about 8 years for a cherry tree to grow to where you can get a pickable crop where you can go send it to market. So 8 years, if you got to be patient, and you have a long-term commitment to that particular crop. So the crop goes south. So what are you going to do? So we have all these cherries here, and it's not, and I wouldn't have the money to replace it, but also I don't have the time. I'm 76 years old, So you're talking about I'll be in my 80s before they start to produce, and so the problem is with Bing cherries. Bing cherries, Charlie's favorite fruit. It's one ugly fruit for me, honestly, and there's a lot of good cherries out there, but they require more winter chill than we can muster in this valley. I had 10% of a crop this year, 10%. So I had 2 back-to-back terrible years, and I hate to be negative, but the other stuff is fantastic. I mean, the apricots and the peaches and all that, but Bing cherries in particular. And I don't know if you want us to cover that about the problem with the valley now being, and climate change. The amount of winter chill that we can get for a lot of these fruits. The Bing is the hardest one to grow, and I like it too. But it certainly is. It breaks my heart a lot. So.
Well, Charlie's daughter Deborah is here tonight. Where are you, Deborah Olson? She's waving her hand back there. Deborah turned the cherry at C.J. Olson's stand into a marketing adventure. She had prizes for cherry spitting. She had all kinds of other things you could do during the cherry season. And it was a wonderful way to expose, a small business that produced wonderful fruit. So I just wanted to do a shout out because Deborah did such a great job, and it was such a loss to a lot of us locally when they decided in 2018 to close the fruit stand. Was that a hard decision for you, Charles?
Well, sentimentally, it was very hard, but realistically, you have to realize what's in front of you and where you can go, and it was going nowhere. There's so much competition around here, and I just make a little story. If you have a couple of kids and you're going to the Safeway, and you have to drag the kids with you or take them with you. I'm sorry about dragging. Anyway, you go and then you get kind of tired, and then you're not going to be so anxious to drive to Olson's to get 2 pounds of cherries when you have a couple of kids in the back seat and all this and that and the other. So Trader Joe's offers good fruit. They buy the cherries and they put them on a special for 50 cents a pound. And you can't survive in the fruit stand at 50 cents a pound. So Andy knows he's right when he says. So that's what we call the demise, one of the reasons.
But you're now selling some of your fruit, and Deborah's working on the distribution, and you're working with Andy. Is that correct? Andy, can you tell us how that works? Or does Deborah just have an office on your property?
Oh, she has a packing.
Use your mic. Yeah, there you go.
She has a little packing shed, and she's packing. She's packing some fresh cherries, usually at her home, I think, and also a lot of. She's got some. She sells to. Maybe she can even fill in on it. But what she does is she sells to some of the higher end fruit markets like Drager's.
And I've seen them at Drager's.
And those kind of places, yeah. But she has a facility there that a small little facility where she packs in my place.
Here's a question someone just gave us about the age of a pear tree. And this maybe not be something your expertise in, but I'm going to ask you. someone wrote that I have the oldest productive Bartlett pear tree in Los Altos, 70 years old. Is this unusual for pears?
I'm a stone fruit guy. I can't comment on pears or apples, but it sounds pretty old.
How long does a thrifty, healthy apricot tree live?
Well, I've seen apricot trees in Hollister that were over 90 years old, but it just depends. I mean, there's a lot of diseases that they're susceptible to, and usually they if you're talking about an average lifespan, probably only about 40 years. But if they're in the right aspect, in the right exposure, and the right soil and all that, and they don't get hit by eutypa or bacterial canker or all the myriad other diseases, they could last a long time.
We also got a question from, and you and I talked about this earlier, from someone in the audience about how nowadays in the modern valley, people who have trees in their gardens really don't have a struggle with the critters getting all the fruit. And without being too violent, can you tell us how you deal with these in your own business? Charlie, you're pondering.
Well, unfortunately, you're correct about these critters. They really can cause some bad damage. And one of the things they do that nobody even thinks about is when they look the cherry tree or the cotton tree or a peach tree, it's that big around. That's about it, and it's about this high. You prune it to your waist or your knee, so you tell you how big you want to make it. And then these little critters come along and climb up that little trunk and break off the laterals that make the tree. And so now you have a tree that's planted and no laterals because of the squirrels or whomever. And in the earlier days, not so far early, the county provided us with a strychnine bait that we put in the orchard, and we had to because they take over. And you see some of these places where there's a lot of squirrels around, ground squirrels, and nobody messes with them, and they have holes going all directions. Sometimes that hole goes to 200 feet and 20 feet deep, and it's hard to eradicate them, and they have all kinds of tools, but now you can't get that poison, so you're stuck and you can't shoot a gun. You're kind of stumped on what you do.
Did they give you a 007 license to kill?
Well, we used to do that, but you don't do it anymore. I would be a crazy fool to even have a gun in my car pickup.
No, I didn't mean with a gun, but they are eliminated somehow. Is that right? And Andy, you have some methods you're using.
Yeah, I talked to the ag commissioner a while back, the ag department. He said this is the worst outbreak of squirrel activity in a long time. Probably due to the light rains we had, or no rain, and the squirrel population just exploded. And it's an urban pest too. It's not just in the orchards, but I'm sure if you probably had experience with whether it's ground squirrels or tree squirrels, excuse me, it's unbelievable. And we have an area that is fallow right next to one of our orchards. It belongs to another landowner who doesn't care about disking the land. Disking the land can disturb their burrows and all that. It would help. So I lost probably about 15 or 20% of the nectarines that were right there, and also the apricots. And so I'm getting crop losses. We do a lot of trapping, which is humane. We also have a lot of owl houses. They don't usually go after squirrels except small ones.
But the owls go after other rodents?
Yeah. They say that a family of owls, like say 2 owlets and the parents, are good for 1,000 rodents a year. So it pays to have them. We have them quite, and a lot of them around. So they help. And another way you can kill particularly squirrels, but also gophers, is there's these contraptions now that emit either carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide. It's you just pipe it into their burrow, And one breath, they go to sleep, and the next breath, they're gone. It's pretty humane. The problem is that they're very, very smart and evasive, and you can trap a whole bunch of them and say, "Oh, I got them all," and then come back, and it's just you can see them scurrying all over the place the next day. So it's
That's a
hard.
big
It's very
challenge.
difficult. It's like it's like Custer with the Indians. The Indians just keep on coming, and that's the way it is with these squirrels. And Custer had the guns and everything. They just had bows and arrows, but they're really a menace. Yeah.
The squirrels are, yeah.
Squirrels are, yeah.
Right. Okay, we're going to post this, so we have to keep it proper. During the harvest, someone's asked, can you tell us in the apricot harvest, let's say, what is a typical day like that you go through from getting up in the morning until finishing in the orchard at night? What's a harvest day like?
5 a.m. is a pretty good time to start. And it all depends how you do it, but most of the time we pay by the hour so we can control what the people pick, so they pick them ripe. That's what we want to have them ripe, and because they make better dried apricots and they sell and they taste better if you buy them just to nibble on and make jam. So you have to pick them a certain way. Damn it! Oh boy! I'll forget that. I'm going to go back and finish the squirrel story.
No.
And maybe they'll come back.
But
I put out some.
You pick an apricot tree, one tree more than once, right?
Right,
You're
right,
going
right.
through them and
Okay, I got it.
you're getting
Thank
only.
you.
But you're going through and getting only the ripe fruit and coming back,
Yeah.
right?
So you pick like she says, and we pick for the sell fresh and we pick for dry yard. So we want them ripe, and so you just keep going through the orchard, picking the ripe ones. And you go to the end of the orchard, and you go back to the beginning, and you do it again. But you don't strip the tree. Because if you strip the tree, all the fruit that's in the center of the tree is only half ripe because it doesn't have the sunshine to help it ripen. So that part of the orchard will stay greener longer. So if you have good weather, you don't have a heat wave or a rain or whatever it is, you can get away with that and go back maybe 3 or 4 times because you want to pick them ripe where the people buy them and eat them and then come back. See?
And then where are you sending the fruit? You have fruit cutters ready, standing by,
Yeah.
Andy?
Yeah,
the next step is
the night before you set up your tables for your cutters, and then you spread the fruit on the tray. So when they get there about 6 a.m., they go right to work. And then you started in the afternoon, usually about 4, you quit. And then you stack the trays and then sulfur them overnight. And next morning, the first thing you do is take those, what I call wet fruit, that's sulfured, and you spread them in the sun. And then you do the same thing over and over until it's finished. And if you get lucky, you don't have a bad heat wave or you don't have rain, because the rain really messes it up.
That's pretty rare in California in the
Yeah.
summer.
And then one day you're done and you go, whew. I got to finish my squirrel story though.
Oh, okay. He wants to finish the squirrel
So
story.
I bought 2 have-a-hearts traps to catch the squirrels. So we figured out they like walnuts and what else? Cheese and something else. So we put that stuff in there. And lo and behold, next morning there's 2 or 3 or 4 squirrels in the have-a-heart. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 in one cage. So I had to have a heart. So I would I'd put the squirrels in the back of the pickup. I would drive to Stevens Creek Dam, don't tell anybody. and then I would open the cages on the ground, past the dam. Well, I knew the place to get off the road. And the squirrels would scamper all around. And I was happy that we didn't have to kill them or something. So one day I caught just 1 squirrel, and he was a big squirrel. So he looked at me kind of funny, and I knew he was trying to talk to me, but I couldn't understand. So I took him to my place, and I put the squirrel cage on the ground. I lifted the door so he could run out, and he ran out. And he ran about 25, 30 feet, and he stopped. So I'm watching him, and he's looking around, and he turns around, and he's standing on his hind legs, he's looking at me, and he says to me, "What am I doing here? What did you put me here for? Why am I here?" And it still haunts me. I know that's what he said. Took it from the lush green lawns and the apricot orchards up to the desolate.
I thought you were going to say he said to you, "Here again?"
No.
You know, my father used to do that. We had, by the time he was in his 80s, he had maybe just 2 or 3 trees left. And he used to get those have-a-heart traps, and he would catch the squirrels. And we lived near Covington School in Los Altos, and he would drive them over when there was the Sears across El Camino. He would drive them over to the Sears parking lot and let them out, and then drive home. And then my dad was very honest, scrupulously honest. And then one day he said to me, this was when I was home visiting, he said to me, "You know, I read in the paper that it's against the law to transport wildlife without a license." He said, "So I just gave up." So that's a little bit like your squirrel story. I have a question for Andy. You know, this is some of the richest soil in the best climate in the world. Do you ever think that California may want to use this again for growing things?
I don't see it myself because this is Silicon Valley. You have the highest property values in the entire world. You know, the housing is the cost of housing is unbelievable, and orchards in particular, they need extensive land. You know, you've got different kinds of agriculture. You can have agriculture in a greenhouse where you're getting much more revenue return from investment per square foot of soil. But you only have like maybe 100 trees per acre with an orchard. Wheat is even worse, of course. You know, there's you need just to make a little bit of money, you need a couple hundred acres of wheat. So that's very extensive. And orchards are somewhere in between. It's just the economics aren't there. The economics aren't there. And once you build something, now one of the things we have when we we have these tours, orchard tours, and we have an area in the back where we had, when we had 45 acres of apricots, we had a large section of dry yard, and it was oiled and paved. And when we pulled out the apricots, we didn't need all that much dry yard, so we tore up all that asphalt and planted more trees. And when I announced that to the crowd, everybody claps, because probably the first time in the whole valley that actually pavement was pulled out and trees were replanted. But that's going to be a rare situation. So,
Charles, what about this work that you do has brought you the most contentment or happiness?
Well, I think now, of course, we were very fortunate in a lot of ways, had a lot of good mentors and all that sort of thing. And brother, say that again.
Yeah, well, has it brought you happiness to do this work?
Yes. What the happiest part is how many people support us with our little fruit stand and our dried fruit operation because of what we do. And people say, "Boy, you must be making a lot of money." I said, "Not really. If we were making a lot of money, there wouldn't be all these houses and businesses. There would be all orchards." But there's no one would complain when they sold. In other words, they weren't making any money. So
That's why they sold out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Andy, I asked you earlier if you ever made wine or anything alcoholic with the fruit that you grew. Do people use these stone fruits for beer, wine, liqueurs?
Yeah. There used to be some wineries that used to make apricot wine in the Santa Clara Valley, usually in the Gilroy area. I think there was Fortino used to make an apricot wine, and there was one wine made out of Santa Rosa plums. Our deal is beer. For some reason, we go to the farmers market in Santa Monica, down in Southern California.
By go to,
And
you mean you sell at
we
the
sell there, yeah.
So they
yeah.
drive, their fruit is so valuable, they drive all the way down to Southern California and can sell it at top dollar. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, we have a large van and we fill it up, and 95% of it is already pre-sold, and it's sold to a lot of food service companies that sell to big hotels and restaurants in Southern California. And really, I have some pride in the fact that some of the top restaurants in Southern California, they actually put Andy's Orchard fruit on the menu. They actually mention it's Andy's Orchard, Baby Crawford peaches, or whatever. It's really nice. There are also a lot of microbreweries in Southern California, and there's some up here too, that buy our seconds. This is fruit that tastes good. I mean, the eating quality is fantastic, but they're usually, they've got some defects and whatever, and so we sell that at half price, and they make some pretty excellent beers. There's a local brewery right in Morgan Hill called Kelly. Is that right? Kelly Brewing, and they've made a cherry beer, a couple of different kinds of cherry beer. They made an apricot beer and a peach beer, and I'm not a beer guy. But this one cherry beer tasted pretty darn good. and then there's another one. There's another one in I think it's in SoCal or Santa Cruz somewhere. It's called Santa Darius, and they took some of our Bonnie Royal apricots, which is a very rich tasting apricot, and they made some beer out of that. And there's some there was I can't remember the name of the Bonnie Doon. They tried some of our green gauge plums and made a liqueur out of it, but they couldn't sell it because they didn't have a license to. They were just trying it out, but it was pretty good. So.
I didn't ask you this question. What about this business that you're in, that you have done, gives you the most happiness or satisfaction, contentment?
Yeah. I would say when we have these tours and the people come from all over, Morgan Hill, to drive all the way to Morgan Hill, San Jose is the 9th largest metropolitan area in the whole country.
Yeah.
And for people to come there from the city to visit us and really rave about the experience and the fruit quality. I mean, it's just positive feedback. I think that's what probably makes me the most satisfying experience is just to hear that. Just to hear that how we're doing something and we seem to be doing it right, and people acknowledge that. So,
Charles, we're almost we're going to wrap up pretty soon. Connie, yeah.
Could you ask Charlie to tell the story about happy memories, the story of him like a Huckleberry Finn moment? Tell me about the raft you built at that age.
Did you build a raft at one point?
I went to see the movie with my friend Chester. We were buddies. We were bosom buddies. We were 13 years old, maybe. And Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn built a raft and sailed down the Mississippi on it. So the neighbor fence, the guy was putting a new fence to Chester's house, so we asked him if we could have the old wood. There was a gravel pit about a mile away, a mile and a half away, right next to Sunken Gardens golf course. It's still there, they have a driving range there. So in the middle of it was a big pond because it had been raining. So we built a raft right there. We stole Mr. McGee's hammer and nails, and we nailed it together, and they had a pole in the middle. And in the movie, they jump on the raft and go down the Mississippi. So anyway, we got it all set there, and we pushed it in the water, and it was just bombing. So we said, okay, we jump on it and grab that pole, and we jumped on and grabbed the pole, and the whole thing went to the bottom of the river. And now we're soaking wet, but they climb out of that hole, and so we had to ride our bicycles back home because it was.
Well, since there was water in the creek, this has to have been in the winter.
Yeah,
it
dead
must
of
have
winter.
been. Okay. Well, we're getting close to wrapping up. So I'm going to ask them both about their legacies. We've been talking for a little over an hour. And I wonder, Andy, what you would like to think of your legacy being in this valley. I know you've worked hard to revive historic fruits, to tell the story of this valley, and the joy that the hard work, but the joy that it brought many. It fed people around the world. During 2 world wars, this fruit was all around the world. What would you like your personal legacy to be?
That's a really difficult one. You were talking about the Santa Clara Valley and its legacy. They grew a lot of apricots and prunes. They dried them, and the whole world were they were shipped all over the world, and that's what made Santa Clara Valley famous. It was a commodity, and like you say, through 2 world wars, my feeling is that legacy kind of is extended to something like what we're doing, but we've changed. As this place gets more and more urbanized, you had to adapt, just like the raccoons have adapted to urban environment. They'll go through a garbage can, or they'll eat dog food that's left out, things like that. That's what we're doing too as farmers. We're trying to adapt to changing times, and I'd like to think that one of the things I've done is, we could have given up a long time ago. There was at least 30 different small family farms around our area in Morgan when we moved there, and now there's only 1. And the reason why is we tried to adapt, and so we went from commodities to specialty crops, and we're surviving. We're not, we're just right on the edge, but we're surviving. And the reason why is we get more money for our crops, but like Charlie said, you have to pick the trees like 3 or 4 times just to get that fruit at the peak of flavor, and that's why the people down in Southern California love our fruit, and we charge them plenty for it. But then you realize how much time and money and effort that you put in to produce that. And I'd like to think that, like that Wendell Berry quote was, that the farmer is kind of a craftsman. He's kind of an artist. And I'd like to think that what I've done is my canvas is the fruit, and I feel I've done something that I'm proud of.
Well, I think that's a beautiful, beautiful statement of a legacy. Charles, how would you like your work to be remembered?
Well, I learned from my mom how to sell things and how to treat the people. I always wanted to be, when somebody left, that they were happy and came back. And so we gave them a fair deal, an honest deal. And that's all I need, because that's all it means, that you did it right. And you can take a lot of shortcuts in this business if you want to, and we never took that route. And so that's the legacy I'd love to have. People, well, he always raised good fruit, and he was fair with the people and honest.
Well, I think those are wonderful answers and a good way to close tonight. And I hope you'll all stand and give these 2 gentlemen a real round of applause and thank them for coming tonight.